Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, everyone, from wherever you're joining us in the world. You're all very welcome to our ESASI FocusOn ICAO session today. We're delighted to see so many participants online. Before we get started, just to introduce myself, my name is Kate Fitzgerald. I'm a member of the ESASI committee. I'm also an Inspector of Air Accidents at the AAIU in Ireland. I'll be chairing the session this afternoon. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Due to the number of participants, we will keep all the microphones on mute, otherwise it'll be unmanageable, and cameras switched off. The format of the program is that there'll be a presentation, and after each presentation there will be a very short Q&A session. So if you'd like to ask the presenters any questions, could you just write them in the chat, and we'll answer as many as we can during the Q&As. If we don't get to your question, please accept our apologies, and we will try to answer as many of them as we can after the meeting, and we'll disseminate the answers through our website and newsletter. As you may have seen, this session is being recorded and will be made available on our website afterwards. So we'll get straight on. We have a very packed program and a really excellent panel of speakers, I'm sure that you'll agree today. Our first speaker is Padhraic Kelleher, who I'm sure many of you know is the President of the Air Navigation Commission at ICAO. He's got vast experience both in ICAO and also in the United Kingdom CAA, and was a member of the European Joint Aviation Authorities. Unfortunately, Padhraic wasn't able to join us live today, but he kindly has pre-recorded his presentation for us, so we're going to show that now. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone, and my thanks to ESASI for this opportunity to speak to you today at this Focus on ICAO session. My name is Padhraic Kelleher, and I'm President of the Air Navigation Commission at ICAO. Over the next 15 minutes, I'm going to focus on the ICAO organization overall, what it is, its structure and governance, and how it creates the global aviation standards and recommended practices that we know as the SARPs. Many of you are familiar with ICAO, so I know I will do well to surprise you with anything new, but I have tried. If you are less familiar with ICAO, then I hope you find my perspective helpful. So let's begin with what is ICAO. The International Civil Aviation Organization is a specialized agency of the United Nations. Its origins date back to 1944, when 54 states signed an International Civil Aviation Convention in Chicago. This Chicago Convention made ICAO the convening body on aviation matters for all states who signed up to the convention. So far, 193 states have done so. ICAO ensures that the convention is kept up to date, most obviously through its leadership in the creation and amendment of SARPs, Standards and Recommended Practices, which it publishes in annexes to the convention. It's important to recognize that despite this leadership role, ICAO is not a regulator. It has no authority over the 193 member states and none over the industry either. Instead, ICAO relies on each state to implement the SARPs through national regulations and enforcements. Framing everything that ICAO does are its mission, vision, and strategic objectives. Let's begin with the vision which you see on screen. It's to achieve the sustainable growth of the global aviation system. The mission describes how, and that is by serving as the global forum of states for international civil aviation. And in terms of what it works to achieve, there are 5 strategic objectives for ICAO: enhancing Global aviation safety is of course a key objective, and ICAO's Global Aviation Safety Plan sets the context for this work. Increasing global air navigation capacity and efficiency is also key, and the related activities are guided by ICAO's Global Air Navigation Plan. To enhance civil aviation security and facilitation, ICAO helps states to maintain security, facilitation, and related border security provisions that are globally interoperable. ICAO also fosters the economic development of air transport by helping states to develop harmonized economic policies for the industry. Finally, environmental protection continues to increase in importance. ICAO brings aviation stakeholders together to drive collective action that is well informed and consistent with the UN's wider environmental protection policies and practices. So, how does ICAO translate these ambitions into actual day-to-day work? Well, every 3 years, the 193 member states of ICAO come together to check on ICAO's progress towards these objectives and to set the program of work for the following 3 years. This gathering is known as the ICAO Assembly. The 41st session of the Assembly was held last autumn, and at this event, ICAO's Business Plan 2023 to 2025 was agreed, and the budget for the next 3 years was set. As you can see, the budget is a little under 120 million Canadian dollars per year, of which 90% is funded by contributions from states, allocated in proportion to the size of their aviation activities. ICAO earns the other 10% from things such as technical training, conferences, provision of aviation data. To oversee the delivery of the plan and to manage ICAO overall for the 3-year period, the Assembly appointed a council with members drawn from 36 of the member states, and it selected Mr. Salvatore Sciacchitano to lead it. The ICAO Council is the governing body that directs the work of ICAO day to day, oversees its engagement with states and other stakeholders, settling disagreements between states and so forth. The Chicago Convention also makes the Council responsible for formally adopting ICAO SARPs into the annexes to the Convention, a key role for the Council. Although the Council is appointed for just a 3-year period, it is supported by the permanent staff of the ICAO Secretariat. The Council has appointed Mr. Juan Carlos Salazar to lead the Secretariat. Completing the structure set out in the Chicago Convention is the Air Navigation Commission, a body established to lead ICAO's technical work and to advise the Council. The Council elects the 19 members of the Commission and a president to lead it, and currently that's me. I find it useful to think of ICAO as being structured a bit like a government. The Assembly looks a little like the members of Parliament, the Council resembles a cabinet led by the Prime Minister, and the Secretariat is like the civil service. The Commission perhaps might be thought of as a chief scientific advisor to the cabinet, who also directs the bulk of the government's legislative programme. Let me say a little more about the Secretariat, and then I'll turn to the work of the Air Navigation Commission. The ICAO Secretariat includes 5 main bureaux. Air navigation focuses on safety and on air navigation capacity and efficiency. Air transport looks at security, the environment, and economic development. Technical cooperation supports states to implement ICAO standards and to build capacity. Legal affairs and external relations advises on legal matters within ICAO, oversees a range of international treaties, and manages diplomatic relations with states in which ICAO staff are based. Administration and services takes care of HR, language services, conference management, estate management, and so on. The Secretariat also has a range of offices taking care of finance, strategy, communications, internal audit, ethics, and so on. Although headquartered in Montreal, ICAO operates offices across the 7 ICAO regions worldwide. Mexico City for North and Central America and the Caribbean, Lima for South America, Paris for Europe and North Atlantic, Dakar for Western and Central Africa, Nairobi for Eastern and Southern Africa, Cairo for the Middle East, and Bangkok for Asia and the Pacific, with a supporting office in Beijing. The ICAO Secretariat operates with just about 670 staff, supplemented by around 240 secondees and contractors, so just over 900 staff in total. Let me turn then to the Air Navigation Commission. And for those of you yet to visit us in Montreal, this is the Air Navigation Commission's meeting room. The Air Navigation Commission was established by the Chicago Convention to act as chief technical advisor to the ICAO Council. This recognized the reality that members of the Council are usually career diplomats with little or no aviation expertise. The Commission was tasked not only with advising them, but also with taking accountability for ICAO's work on aviation safety and on the capacity and efficiency of the air navigation system globally. The 19 members of the Commission are technical experts who, although nominated by a state, act independently of states to bring impartial technical expertise to the table. The current commissioners include air traffic controllers and engineers, airspace and airport design and management experts, aircraft design and maintenance engineers, private and professional pilots, and experts in military aviation and air law. Also participating in our meetings are experts from international organizations representing airports, air navigation service providers, general aviation, airlines, business aviation, the aerospace manufacturers, pilots, air traffic controllers, and air traffic systems engineers. The main driving force for the work of the Commission is the Commission's 22 expert panels and specific working groups. I'll just use the term panels from now on. About 2,000 experts from state administrations, industry, and other stakeholders around the world participate in these panels. Each panel is supported by the professional staff of the ICAO Secretariat, as of course is the Commission itself. For many of you, the Accident Investigation Panel and the Flight Recorder Specific Working Group of the Flight Ops Panel are of most interest, I would guess. These two groups are chaired by Olivier Ferrante and Ted Givens, respectively, with Thor Thormodsson as secretary to both. And you'll be hearing from Olivier and Thor at this session today. Of the 19 annexes to the convention, the Air Navigation Commission manages the development of 16 directly, and for many of you, Annex 13 is of most interest. Work on Annexes 9 and 17 is taken forward by an aviation security panel directly overseen by the Council. The ANC is briefed on the work and advises Council as necessary. Work on Annex 16, covering noise, emissions, and carbon offsetting, is undertaken by the Committee on Aviation Environmental Protection, also known as CAPE. CAPE reports directly to Council, but Council refers all of CAPE's recommendations to the Air Navigation Commission, and the Commission takes them forward in line with our usual SARP development process. And it is this SARP development process that I want to describe to you now as the last part of this briefing. You will hear great descriptions of the ICAO standards development process from your other speakers today. The description I have for you is from the perspective of the Air Navigation Commission. And for us, the process begins with a suggestion that a SARP be created or revised. These suggestions can come from a wide range of sources, from an ICAO assembly or other high-level conference, from states or industry, from within the Air Navigation Commission, its panels, or from the Secretariat. The ANC may, of course, decide not to proceed, but it may also ask the Secretariat to form a study group if it feels there's a need to flesh out the suggestion and perhaps recommend the right way forward. Although the Commission can create a new panel if needed, usually we task an existing panel. The task is described in a job card, setting out what is to be delivered and by when, and collectively these job cards make up the air navigation work programme that the Commission uses to manage the work of the panels. When the panel completes an item of work, it submits a proposal to the Air Navigation Commission, and usually this takes the form of changes to one or more annexes and to other ICAO documents too. The Commission will work on the proposal with the Secretariat and panel as needed to get to a text that it believes is suitable for consultation. That text is then sent to member states and recognised international organisations who are given 3 months to comment on it. After the 3 months, the Secretariat gathers the feedback and presents it to the Commission together with a suggested course of action for each comment. This typically means further amendments to the text. So, once the Commission is satisfied that it has a text that properly responds to the consultation inputs, it recommends it to Council for adoption, together with dates when the text will be effective and applicable. The Council votes on whether to adopt the Commission's recommendation, and if there is a 2/3 majority in support, the Secretariat publishes an interim edition of the revised SARP, which now includes the changes generated by the consultation. States are given 3 months again to review it and to register their formal disapproval with ICAO. If the majority of states do not register disapproval, then the SARP becomes effective and is formally a part of the related annex. States are then required to notify ICAO if they intend to implement something different to the amended SARP. These differences are published by ICAO and the revised SARP becomes applicable, and this completes the SARP development process. Regrettably, this also brings me to the end of my presentation for you today. I do hope that my description of ICAO's structure, governance, and SARP's development process was of value, even to those of you most familiar with ICAO. If you want to know more about the material I have talked about, there's a lot of information available on the ICAO website. Also, my colleague Thor Thormodsson has kindly agreed to take questions on this material. And if there are any that he feels should be referred back to me, I will happily provide responses for your session chair to disseminate. So let me conclude by thanking each and every one of you for the work that you do to secure for future generations a safe, efficient, clean and sustainable aviation system that will truly enhance their lives and take care of our planet too. Thank you.
So our thanks to Padhraic there for that fantastic overview of ICAO, and it's a great start to our session today. At the moment, I don't see any questions in the chat, so I suggest we move straight on to the next presentation, which appropriately will be given by Padhraic's colleague at ICAO, Thormodsson. Thormodsson leads the Aircraft Accident and Incident Investigation Group at ICAO, having carried out a number of different roles in ICAO. Prior to joining ICAO, Thormodsson led the Icelandic Aircraft Accident Investigation Board, and he's going to talk to us today about ICAO's operational involvement. So I'll hand over to Thormodsson.
Thank you, Kate. Good afternoon, everybody, and good morning to those that are on my side of the Atlantic. Like Kate said, I will be discussing the ICAO operational involvement of the AIG section. But first, I'm from Iceland, and we like to talk about the weather. That's usually what we do first. It's something that comes from the fact of being sailors and farmers. So ICAO, sorry, Montreal, we have a very cold morning, minus 21 degrees, sunny but breezy. Today I will be joined by my good friend and former colleague Thor, who will be running the slides. So Thor, you're ready to go?
Unfortunately, me from the AAIU, so yeah, we're ready.
Okay. How's the weather? Anyway, skip that. I'm going to go into the presentation. So we can go to slide number number 2, the second slide. Thanks. So I'm going to be talking about just briefly about personal changes within the AIG section of ICAO. Then I'll jump into the ICAO operational involvements. 3 streams of accident investigations that ICAO participates in. The first, there are the fact-finding activities by ICAO. Secondly, when ICAO serves as an advisor or observer in investigation of another state or of a state, actually. And the third one is when ICAO is asked to come in and assess an investigation performed by a contracting state. Finally, I will discuss the involvement of the AIG section and other ICAO experts in AIG in the USOP program, conducting USOP activities. But I will mostly focus on the mandatory information request tool, which I believe that's might not be known by many of you, but it's a very useful tool. But I will discuss that further later on. So we can go to the next slide, Kelly. So for the AIG section, many of you might know that Marcus Costa, who was the chief of the section, he retired back in 2021, and his post has yet to be filled. I believe Marcus is actually with us here today. He told me he would join us, and he has actually joined ICAO again on a contract. So he's going to be working with me for the next year, developing tools and well, mostly updating our manuals. So we're delighted to have him back. He used to be my boss, but now I'm the one that is kind of looking at the watch when he comes in. So the next one is Andrew de Kock. He retired in June last year. Andrew, again, like Marcus, has also joined us on a contract. So he's working on developing training material for implementation assistance for states under the Global Aviation Training Program of ICAO with assistance from the AIG section. Now, I joined the section in August last year and currently leading the work there, but I'm a one-man band. I'm the only one there, so it's fairly easy for me to manage the personnel. But we're hoping that that will change, and I will receive the necessary resources that I need. Next slide, thank you, Kelly. So going into the ICAO investigation involvements, so throughout the years, ICAO has been involved in a number of investigations, in particular in the context of difficult political situations. ICAO commonly acts in a diplomatic capacity to facilitate the dispute resolution that might come up. Next slide. So the fact-finding activities by ICAO, which are the traditional investigations which were actually conducted by ICAO and the section and other experts within the Secretariat. Where there may have been a conflict or interest situation and an act of unlawful interference, ICAO might be asked to join or conduct an investigation. ICAO has conducted fact-finding activities at the request of ICAO member states through the Council, which Padhraic described to you. This is done under Article 55E of the Chicago Convention. These fact-finding activities have increased transparency into occurrences where the state of occurrence does not conduct an investigation. So I repeat, this has been when there's been no investigation by the state of occurrence. So when the UN Security Council issues a resolution which includes asking ICAO to investigate under Article 55E, ICAO will most likely comply, and the ICAO Council will make a decision for the ICAO fact-finding activity. Next slide, thank you, Kelly. So the Convention on International Civil Aviation, or the Chicago Convention, under Article 55E, and there you have it. I'm not going to read it to you. Just going to let it sit there for a few seconds so you can see it. But this is the article that has been used for asking ICAO to participate or to conduct investigations. So next slide. There are a number of examples of such fact-finding activities. I've decided to list 3 of them, maybe the most well-known. So the first one was after the accident involving the UN Secretary General, Dag Hammarskjöld, on 18 September 1961. Another one was subsequent to the Korean airline 007 downed by a Soviet fighter over the Sea of Japan on 31st August 1983. And finally, there was a fact-finding activity by ICAO following Iran Air Airbus 300 downed by USS Vincennes in the Strait of Hormuz on 3rd July 1988. Now, in the preamble of the investigation report for the last one, the Iranian A300, it was released and was clearly stated that the ICAO fact-finding investigation was not an ICAO Annex 13 investigation. These are specific fact-finding activities, and they're not Annex 13 investigations. Such fact-finding activities are more historical and not being conducted recently by ICAO. So we haven't been doing those for quite some time. Next slide, thank you. The second type of activities that ICAO participates in are activities where ICAO is an advisor or observer in an investigation conducted by a state. So more recently, ICAO experts have acted as advisors, observers in politically sensitive investigations, such as aircraft downings. The presence of ICAO AAIU experts during the process of such investigation and the opportunity for the investigator in charge to communicate directly with ICAO has provided multiple benefits. ICAO commonly acts in a diplomatic capacity to facilitate the dispute resolution. ICAO has assisted the investigators in charge in performing the investigation to ensure they are done in accordance with Annex 13 provisions. ICAO involvement in such activities has increased transparency into the occurrence. And the presence of ICAO has increased confidence in the investigation process and the final report when it was released. Next slide, thank you. Now, a few examples of such investigations that ICAO has participated in. The first one being accident to an ATR-42 north of Pristina in Kosovo on 12 November 1999. You might remember that was during the Balkan crisis there. That aircraft was operated on behalf of the UN World Food Programme, and the investigation was performed by BEA in France, but ICAO participated there as an advisor and observer. More recently, the downing of Malaysian Boeing 777 MH17 over Ukraine. Ukraine had delegated this investigation to the Netherlands. Of course, it was a heavily, it was a conflict zone and highly political situation, as you might remember. And then finally, the downing of Ukrainian Boeing 737 PS752 near Tehran, Iran. Now, this investigation was conducted by the Iranian Accident Investigation Authority. Now, just to add that the involvement of ICAO in the BEA investigation to the ATR-42 accident in Pristina in 1999 led to an ongoing cooperation between ICAO and the UN World Food Programme and the UN Humanitarian Aviation Services. And under that agreement, ICAO, the USOP program, regularly audits and performs audits of the UN flight operations, including the World Food Programme. Next slide, thank you. ICAO has also, by request, been involved in a number of investigations to assess or provide assistance, in particular when the aircraft was chartered by United Nations for humanitarian purposes. Next slide. Example of those is when ICAO conducted an activity on the request of the UN to review and assess the investigation into an accident to an Mi-8 helicopter operated by a Sudanese contractor for the US mission in Darfur, Sudan. And this was on 29 September 2008. There was a disagreement between the UN and the Sudan at the time for cause of the accident, where Sudan was claiming that it had been shot down by some terrorists. UN was on a different opinion, and ICAO came in and did an assessment of that investigation. ICAO was also asked to conduct an activity review and assess the investigation into an Airbus A320 Airblue 202 in Pakistan on 28 July 2010. That was a very politically sensitive situation and disagreement by a number of parties within the state on the actual cause and the quality of the investigation. So ICAO sent 2 of his experts there to do an assessment of the investigation. Now, with the majority of the USAP program, the ICAO Universal Safety Oversight Audit Program, such activities are less likely since ICAO would, in such a case, rather conduct a USAP audit in the area of AIG on that particular state rather than do such an assessment. So next slide, Kelly. Several of these before mentioned investigations have benefited from significant support provided by ICAO experts who have full knowledge and past practical experience of the safety investigation legal context, processes, and related challenges. ICAO has held different roles with various degrees of involvement in the conduct of investigations. However, consideration should be given to adding guidance material of inviting ICAO as an advisor observer for investigations deemed to be politically controversial, such as for these downing of civil aircraft. Now, this is currently being considered by the accident investigation panel, and perhaps Olivier will elaborate more on that later in his presentation. Next slide. Now let's move to the use of activities which the ICAO AIG section and AIG expert within ICAO are heavily involved with. Myself and a number of the ICAO AIG experts participate in use of activities. We conduct audits and validations. We're also involved in the mandatory information request process or applying that tool. We have a number of qualified use of AIG auditors within the ICAO Secretariat at headquarters and also in the regional offices. One currently in the Euronet office in Paris, which is Arnaud Desjardin, who you will see later on. We, in these activities, we assess states' accident and incident investigation capabilities, but we also assist in developing and updating the AIG use of protocol questions. Next slide. Now, the mandatory information request, or MIR, not to be mistaken for an MRI, which is a completely different thing. An MIR is issued under the USAP CMA process when concerns are raised by internal or external stakeholders, so it could be external, about aspects of a state safety oversight system. MIRs have been issued for concerns raised about states' lack of compliance in the process of an aircraft accident and incident investigation. The AIG section is actively involved in issuing of an MIR in the area of AIG. And finally, states are required to respond to an MIR. If ICAO sends a state an MIR, the state is obligated under the MOU that was signed by the state to respond to the MIR. Next slide. I'm going to give you a few examples of MIRs that have either been sent or are in the process of being sent to states. So there was a state that was not cooperating with the state conducting investigation and did not provide required information. We learned of this and we sent an MIR in this case to the state that was not cooperating. A state stopped an investigation into a major accident and never issued a final report or interim statements. So this is a case of an MIR being sent to the state to receive information on why the investigation was stopped and whether they were going to issue a report on that particular accident. We also have a case where state ignored the comments on a draft report from a state participating investigation, and they didn't amend or append the comments to the actual report. This one has not been sent yet; it's being considered. And then finally, state judicial authority, they arrested the flight crew of an aircraft involved in an accident right after the accident. So this one is being considered also. And we haven't decided whether we're going to send this one, but these are examples of MIRs. So this is a powerful tool that we can use in cases where states have an issue with in their cooperation with another state. Next slide. So that concludes my discussion on the operational aspects of the AIG section and the AIG experts within ICAO. We are always willing to provide assistance, guidance, and clarifications. You can send your request to the AIG inbox at aig@icao.int, and we will get back to you. And finally, I'm going to show you the ICAO public website, the AIG page on that, or AIG area there. And thank you, Kelleher. I saw that you jumped onto that slide. I missed queuing you for that one. So this is the accident investigation website. It conducts. It doesn't conduct anything. It includes information on the addresses of accident investigating authorities. And it shows and it gives information about the two panels that we are operating, the accident investigation panel and the flight recorder special working group, a library of safety recommendation of global concerns, e-library of final reports, and so on and so forth. So I encourage you to visit that website and take a look at it. And like I said before, if you have any questions or need guidance or any kind of assistance, by all means, feel free to reach out. So we are here to help. So that concludes my my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thor. It's fascinating to see the breadth of the operational involvement of ICAO. So thank you very much for that. We just have time for one or two quick questions. So I have a question here from, I see there's a question from Dave, but that relates to ICAO processes. So I'm going to hold that one until later in the session, because I know that topic is covered in quite a lot of detail in a later presentation. There's a question from Tom, who's asking, are there currently initiatives within ICAO to ensure that all reports on accidents and serious incidents are published in the English language? And the second part to the question, is there a single repository available within ICAO collecting all investigation reports? And is that freely available to the public?
So for the first question about the English language, well, ICAO operates in, well, we have the 6 languages of ICAO, which is English, Arabic, Chinese, French, and Spanish. And believe Russian too. So ICAO does not insist that all investigation reports are published in English. They could be in one of these ICAO languages. So there's nothing in the pipes for all investigation reports to be published in English. And regarding the publication of final reports, we do have the library of final reports, but of course we can only publish the ones that have been submitted to us. Now the accident investigation panel has a group that is looking into and actively collecting reports from around the world. And we're hoping that in time we will capture more and hopefully capture most of the reports that have been issued. So I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you. Thanks. And just another question. Where does ICAO get its experienced investigators from to carry out and assist on ICAO investigations? Who is the IIC?
So ICAO is not a state, and like I said before, the investigations or these fact-finding activities that ICAO did perform in the past and hasn't really been performing recently. Those are the only types of investigations that ICAO actually performed themselves. Now that was led by the chief of the AIG section at the time, Kai Frostel, and before him, I'm not really sure who was there in 1961 doing the first one with Dag Hammarskjöld accident, but I know that the ones later on were led by the chief mostly, and he was assisted by the expert within the secretariat of ICAO. We have a operations section, we have an airworthiness section, or it's now been merged and is part of the operations section, but we have technical experts for pretty much every domain in aviation. So it's been led by the chief and then assisted by various experts. And I believe in some cases even ICAO contracted some experts from the outside to assist. But this is all way before my time, actually. So I'm basing my answer on what I've heard from Kai Frostel and others that were part of that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And just one last question before we move on to the next presentation. What have you found the most challenging aspect of your role since joining the AIG? Lack
of resources. That's been my main challenge. So the AIG section was a section with the chief, Kai Frostel, and not before him, and then Marcus Costa, and 3 technical officers. Currently, I'm the only one there. And actually we've been asked to take on new roles. So recently, the ATREP system has been moved back to the AIG section, but I have yet to receive the resources to manage that. So that's what I'm working on right now, discussing within ICAO to receive the necessary resources to conduct this work according to our terms of reference and the obligations that we have to the contracting state. So by far that is my main challenge. The others, there's really nothing, and this might sound a bit in vain, but I cannot think of anything really that has been very challenging for me. I'm lucky because I can reach out to Marcus and Andre and others, and also the team of experts that currently is in this session here. We are a family in AIG. We work together and we help each other. So I've never had an issue that I haven't been able to solve myself or reach out and have assistance from somebody in this group and other AIG groups.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much, Thor. So we'll move on to the next presentation now. So our next presenter is Arnaud Desjardin. Arnaud is an aeronautical engineer by background. He spent many years as an air safety investigator at the BEA. He joined ICAO in 2017 as a regional officer for safety in the European and North Atlantic Regional Office in Paris, where he's involved in promoting SARP implementation, the Global Aviation Safety Plan, and the regional plans. And Arnaud today is going to talk to us about the ICAO annexes and also about protection of protection of safety data. Yes, thank you, Arnaud. Thanks.
You're welcome. Well, thank you, Kate. I'm very glad to be here this afternoon or this morning, depending on which side of the Atlantic you are right now. So let's talk indeed about ICAO and its annexes. And I'd like to try to show you why they are here, what are they used for, and again, how are they developed and amended. So next slide. So as previously said, it all started in December 1944, where states signed an international convention in Chicago. So now there are 193 contracting states to the Chicago Conventions, and that Chicago Conventions lays down the general principles in air navigation. Those principles are, to start with, is airspace sovereignty with Article 1 of the Convention, where states exercise sovereignty in the airspace above its territory. Second principle is about civil and state aircraft. The Convention only applies to civil aircraft. Also, provisions regarding scheduled and not scheduled air services. The main distinction between those two types of services, and maybe most importantly, the rules of the air, where in Article 12 of the Chicago Convention, states undertake to keep their own rules uniform with those of the annexes. So let's take a closer look at some of the articles of interest in the Chicago Convention. If you go to the next slide, you can see that Article 26 to the Convention is the one dealing with investigation of accidents. And you already can note in this article the notion of the state in which the accident occurred, the state of occurrence. You also already have the notion of the participation of the state of registry into the investigation. And finally, you also have that notion of publishing a final report. The provision of Article 26 were then further detailed, as you know, in Annex 13 to the Chicago Convention, Annex 13, the Aircraft Accident and Incident Investigation. But Annex 13, next slide. So Annex 13 is not the only annexes. Those annexes are covering the whole range of international aviation matters. They are the fundamental basis for harmonized global aviation safety and efficiency. But to illustrate the need for all those 19 annexes, I would like to tell you a story. So on the next slide, let's imagine a licensed person, let's say a pilot, who wants to fly. So he would find how to get his license in Annex 1 to the Chicago Convention. That pilot or that person would like to follow a set of rules that he can find in the rules of the air in Annex 2 to the Chicago Convention. Then in the preparation of the flights, he will have to utilize the meteorological services found in Annex 3, and also, of course, use aeronautical charts in Annex 4. And you will have also to use the proper units of measurement to be understood by other pilots and other aviation stakeholders. So that can be found in Annex 5. It will be operating according to Annex 6 with a registered and airworthy aircraft found in Annex 7 and Annex 8 respectively. He would then be crossing borders and availing himself of the facilitation of Annex 9. He uses the aeronautical telecommunication in accordance with Annex 10 to contact the air traffic services according to Annex 11 for separation of his aircraft from another. And hopefully, he will not need search and rescue described in Annex 12 to the Chicago Convention. He will draw wisdom from the work of this of ESASI, but more importantly of the Accident and Incident Investigation Team, according to Annex 13, the famous, and before taking off from an aerodrome that has been certified and operated according to Annex 14. It will have used the Aeronautical Information Services in accordance to Annex 15, and it will depart in an environmentally acceptable aircraft in accordance to Annex 16. It will have been security checked, Annex 17, and any dangerous goods have been properly documented according to Annex 18. And finally, it will mitigate the safety risk through practicing safety management techniques according to Annex 19, allowing the international aviation system to sustain its viable safety records. So this is the end of the little ICAO Annex story. So our pilot now can fly in a safe, secure, sustainable, and uniformed way throughout the world. He will also know which annex to refer to when he has a question about how to operate in aviation. So now that we have established why there is a need for annexes and the standard and recommended practice, you may wonder how they are adopted and adhered to. So I would like to draw your attention to three articles from the Chicago Convention. The first one is Article 54, in which the Council shall adopt international standards and recommended practice, and consider recommendation of the Air Navigation Commission for amendment of the annexes, and that was already said in the previous presentations. Article 37 is also an important one, is the one in which each contracting state undertakes to collaborate in securing the highest practical degree of uniformity in regulation, standards, and procedures. And also to this end, the ICAO shall adopt and amend from time to time, as may be necessary, international standards and recommended practice and procedures dealing with a variety of subjects. One of them is aircraft in distress and investigation of accidents. Article 38 is important also. It may be well known to you because it's the one dealing with notification of differences. This is where any state which finds it impracticable to comply with all respects with any such international standard or procedure shall give immediate notifications to ICAO of the differences between its own practice and the international standards. Another article of interest, and that was already described earlier, is Article 90 to the conventions, where it says that the adoption by the Council of the annexes described in Article 44 that we just saw shall require the vote of 2/3. Remember, 2/3 of the Council at a meeting called for that purpose. And then any such annex or any amendment of an annex shall become effective within 3 months after its submission to the contracting states. And little b, the Council shall immediately notify all contracting states of the coming into force of any annex or amendments thereto. And if I may, yes, next slide. And this, so this is the basic basis in the Chicago Convention for the adoption of SARPs. And they are currently more than 10,000 standards and recommended practices, and they contain those 19 annexes to the Chicago Convention. I wanted to share with you the different components that you may find in annexes. They have different value and different way to interpret them. So of course, the standard is the main one, can be defined as a specification necessary for the safety or regularity of international air navigation, and to which contracting states will conform in accordance to the convention. Recommended practice is a specification or physical characteristic that is desirable in the interest of safety, and for which contracting states will endeavor to conform with. So just like the name says, it's a recommended practice. You may find also in annexes what is called appendices, and they contain material grouped separately for convenience, but they are part of the SARP, and they're adopted by the Council. One good example in our case is Appendix 2 of Annex 13, regarding the protection of accident and incident investigation records. You will find also in the chapter 1 usually the definitions, and they are part of the should be considered as SARPs. And by the way, the notification of differences include the differences in definitions, if any. You also have notes, so and there are some in Annex 13. So they give factual information, references bearing to a SARP, but are not part of the standard or recommended practice. Finally, we might find attachments, not to be confused with appendices. Attachments comprising of supplementary to the SARPs included as a guide to their application. So they're not technically part of the SARPs. And one good example is attachment C of Annex 13 with a list of examples of serious incident. So if you want more info about the process, I tried to be clear and but fast at the same time. So perhaps we saw that already earlier, but when there is a need for make a new or an amended or amend an ICAO standard, the proposals are coming to the Air Navigation Commission. You can please click on the next phase. And this is starting with the development phase. We saw earlier that goes to the ANC, then to an ANC panel, and it will end up with the ANC preliminary review. Then comes the review phase, where I said earlier it was sent to member states. States may have comments, they're compiled, and then goes to the ANC final review, and this is where the adoptions will start, and with the publication phase. So if you click one more time, you will have the approximate length of all those phases. The development phase can take anywhere from 0 to 5 years. The review phase, followed by the adoption and publication phase, approximately 2 years. And you see here that the different important dates to remember the adoption date. So the day it was adopted by the Council, effective date, where it becomes effective, and where states are invited to notify any difference, if any. And application date, where it's applicable and all differences should be notified by that date. It's usually in November. Okay. So now that we have reviewed the making of ICAO standards, you may wonder how do ICAO make sure that the implementation of those standards and recommended practices are effective. And this is done through the USOP CMA. So you can go on the next slide, if you don't mind. So the USOP CMA audits. Yeah, next slide, you should see the wheel of the critical elements. So USOP CMA audits, USOP stands for the Universal Safety Oversight Audit Program, and CMA for Continuous Monitoring Approach. We talked about this already with Thor a few minutes ago. So objective is to determine the state's capability for safety oversight, and I would add accident investigation capabilities. How to do that is through the verification of the status of this member state's implementation of the safety-related SARPs, the various annexes, but also associated procedures and guidance material. What do? You assess the effective implementation of the 8 critical elements of the safety oversight system. So 8 critical elements, starting with legislation and regulations, but also the training of personnel, the technical guidance, the tools, the procedures, the licenses capabilities, certification capabilities, and surveillance obligations, and finally the resolution of safety issues. These are the 8 critical elements. So during the audit, the effective implementation of those critical elements is being assessed. And in the 8 audit areas, including the technical areas, so ops for operational aircraft, air for airworthiness, AIG for accident investigation, ANS for air navigation services, and AGA for airdrome and ground aids. The audit of each of technical areas is based on the set of predefined questions based on the annexes and other documentation. For instance, Annex 13 contains 84 questions. Those questions are called protocol questions or PQs. Total 790 questions are asked during each audit. That ends the presentation about ICAO and its annexes. I would like now to talk about protection of safety information and data. That's on the next slide. I will try to stay within my time. I will start with a general diagram of which provision apply to protect investigation records or safety data or safety information. So there is a strong interaction between several annexes, namely Annex 6, 13, and 19. So when it comes to protecting CVR, cockpit voice recorder, or AIR, so airborne image recorders, the first question you need to ask yourself is, are they being used for an aircraft accident or incident investigation? If the answer is yes, then Annex 13 will prevail, will come first. The provision of Annex 13 will apply. And using the notion of balancing test that I will try to describe briefly a bit later, but balancing test connected to Annex 13. If it's not an aircraft accident or an incident investigation, then the next question to ask yourself is, are they used for safety management purposes? If yes, then the provision of Annex 19 will apply and the principles of exceptions contained in Annex 19. If it's no to both questions, so no accident investigation and no safety management purposes, then refer to Annex 6 provisions for the routine maintenance operations of those devices. We can dig a little bit further into why there are provisions related to the protection of investigation records and safety data in general. You may recall the requirement for independence of investigation in Annex 13, and I will read the standard 5.4.1. Any investigation conducted in accordance with the provision of Annex 13 shall be separate from any judicial or administrative proceedings to apportion blame or liability. And states should ensure cooperation between its AIA, the Accident Investigation Authority, and the judicial authorities. And this cooperation can be achieved through the establishment of protocols, agreements, or other arrangements. As an example, on the next slide, you can see that the ICAO AIG section, the one of Thor, makes available to you as public information examples of actual protocols agreements between AIA and judicial authorities, so you can download them, read them, and maybe use them in your own state if you need to establish some or amend some. Next slide, please. So what is to protect? So this is the famous provision 5.12. I will read it to you. The state conducting the investigation of an accident or incident shall not make the following records available for purposes other than accident or incident investigation unless the competent authority determines that their disclosure or use outweighs the likely adverse domestic and international impact such action may have on that or any future investigations. So what is to protect again? Cockpit voice recordings and airborne image recordings and any transcripts, but also records in the custody of the AIA. And you have the list here. So you see here that that decision to make, that balance to make between disclosure of information for judicial purposes or any other purpose, and the adverse domestic and international impact this might have on this investigation or any future investigation. And this decision is made by a competent authority that has to be designated in every state. And you can go to the next slide, please. And that competent authority will administer the balancing test, trying to take a decision for the greater good. What is best to do? Release the information or not release, not disclose information. And it's not aimed at to prevent the administration of justice. It prevents privacy violation of person involved and ensuring moral dignity, and also ensures the availability of essential information. So, of course, a lot of details are already available in Annex 13, in Appendix 2 in particular, and there is a very detailed guidance material in document 10053, Manual on Protection of Safety Information, when you will know everything about balancing tests and how to administer it. Again, I would like to promote on the next slide, to promote the ICAO AIG section website, where you will find actual decisions of states that have agreed to share actual decisions of their state's competent authority, whether to disclose or not disclose accident investigation records. So you have the link here, and feel free, again, it's public information that can be used for your reference, for your study, or for your curiosity. And I will end with by saying that on the next slide, please, by saying that with due respect to the provisions of protection of investigation records, safety data, and safety information, in the end, please remember the final report has to be publicly available. And I will answer one of the questions we had earlier. Yes, there is an e-library of final reports managed by ICAO, where you can find a lot of final reports publicly available. So you can feel free to download them, read them, and also if you are yourself an accident investigation authority, you can request your final report to be published on that website for the world to download. So if you want more information on the protection of investigation record and safety data and safety information, you will find all the references on the next slide, namely on Annex 13, again, that we talked about, and document 10053. Of course, Annex 19, safety management, and the guidance material, safety management manual, the document 9859. That will end my presentation. I hope I was clear and available for any questions, if any. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arnaud. There was an awful lot of material to cover there, so thank you very much. It was very interesting to see the detail of how the SARPs are developed. And I think that answers one of the earlier questions that we had about the why does it take so long for ICAO to develop annexes and SARPs. So we just have time for a couple of quick questions. So I see one there from Selim asking, what is the difference between effective and applicable date of an annex amendment?
Well, the main difference is if effective is when you're going to becomes effective, and this is where states have to start thinking about which differences they want to notify ICAO, if there are any differences, and those differences need to reach ICAO before the annex becomes applicable. So the applicable date, typically 3 months later.
Okay, thank you. And then just one more question from Stuart. Does ICAO consider a GoPro camera fitted by a pilot to his own light aircraft to be an AIR and therefore covered by the same protection?
Well, that's a technical question. There's those regulatory airborne image recorders, so I'd like to defer back to you or to Thor for this question. I would say probably yes. This is information to be protected, and therefore it would apply for the GoPro camera they could find. You could find on the wreckage, on the accident site.
Okay, Thor, do you have any comments on that?
I'm trying to unmute me here. AIR is a specific type of recorder that is fitted permanently in the aircraft and records. A GoPro is a portable recorder, and therefore would not fall under that. But I believe, and maybe Olivier can jump in, or Ted Givens, who are the leads for the AIG panel and the flight recorder panel, as I like to call it. It's a special working group. But the panels are working currently on provisions for protecting other types of recording devices, such as GoPros. So that is currently being worked by the panels. But Olivier, maybe you can elaborate a little bit further on that, or Ted. Thanks.
Hello, this is Olivier speaking. I'll cover that later in my presentation briefly, but this is a gray area that the panel has addressed. There is jurisprudence on this aspect specifically in the UK, but there is a working group in the panel specifically tasked to look at the protection of devices other than the CVR, and those were defined in Annex 6. But maybe Ted can elaborate a little bit on that. But at this stage, I would say it's a gray zone.
Okay, thank you, Olivier. Ted, would you like to give a quick comment before we move on?
Yeah, certainly. Typically, we're talking about equipment that is permanently installed in the aircraft and not controlled by the pilot as onboard recordings. Within Canada, within the Transportation Safety Board Act, we define onboard recordings as audio or video recordings or the transcripts of those devices installed in the cockpit of an aircraft, the cab of a locomotive, the bridge of a ship, as privileged information. So we've had recently a decision where we had a satellite tracking unit that was installed in the aircraft. It records 2 hours of audio, but just a single channel. It's not controllable by the pilot, and it stood up in the courts as a onboard recording, and privilege was maintained. Someone recording with a GoPro in the cockpit or in the aircraft, it doesn't fall under that same definition.
Okay, thank you very much, Ted, and thank you to all the speakers there for their contributions. Thank you, Arnaud. We'll move on to our next presentation now, which is going to be given by Simon Lee. I know many of you in the audience will know Simon from his time as an air safety investigator at Boeing, and he's provided technical assistance to many state accident investigation authorities over the years. In 2021, Simon co-founded Annex 13 Research, which is a consultancy company providing flight data and investigation consultancy. So Simon today is going to give the perspective of the aviation industry and the impact that ICAO has on the industry. So thank you, Simon.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you for the previous speakers for giving, I think, a broad overview. And just to be clear, the three previous speakers all work for ICAO, and so certainly represent the view. I do not. I'm an outsider in that regard. But as Pork mentioned, I think it's good to get different perspectives on the same topic. So that's sort of what I'm going to describe here is ICAO and its effect on industry. So if we could go to the next slide. So on the left here are words from ICAO's website about what it does. And then on the right in the slightly different blue is sort of my own words. And the way I look at it, and as Pork mentioned, ICAO is not a regulator, it doesn't have authority, but it does publish annexes containing the standards and recommended practices that the national regulators, civil aviation authorities are expected to meet. So that's the first thing. It publishes those standards. I think, in the view from industry is, well, gee, if only we were the FAA or EASA, we could make whatever rules we want. We're free to do whatever we like. But in reality, by becoming a signatory to Chicago Convention, states are obligating themselves to follow the standards and recommended practices that ICAO publishes or publish differences. Arnaud talked about audits that are being done to ensure states comply with the safety requirements. And then I think the other view that of ICAO's activities is its advocate and education activities, where there's a lot of work done, particularly by the regional offices, to assist the member states in different technical areas related to aviation, some directly related to the standards and recommended practices, and then also more broadly organizing conferences in which industry and regulators participate for general safety purposes. Next slide. So this picture here is, I try and, having worked at Boeing for a number of years, it's always sort of good to understand an organizational structure, or even, participating in an investigation. It's good to understand an organizational structure. So this is my attempt to put a view from the bottom, if you will, of what the organizational structure looks like. So ICAO, was created by the Chicago Convention. It has 193 member states, which, the signatories. It is itself a specialized agency of the United Nations. And in addition to the 193 member states, there are invited organizations that participate in ICAO as well. Those fall in three categories. The first is other UN agencies, and Thormodsson mentioned the World Food Organization as one where there's cooperation there. The second is intergovernmental organizations, and an example of that would be the European Union, the IAC, the African Union. There are others. That's what the three dots are supposed to represent. And then non-governmental organizations, typically including those that represent industry. I think Pork mentioned a number of those that participate in various ways. There are also standard-setting organizations such as ARINC, RTCA, CETA, and other organizations as well. And then what I've highlighted in yellow is where we are all today. This is an ESASI presentation, which is a member of ISASI, and ISASI is a recognized organization. So this is where we are, down here in the corner in this little yellow box here. Next slide, please. So you've heard a lot about the articles to the Chicago Convention for a couple of different times. So I'll give you my own take on it. There's a couple that are of interest. The first is there's a specific article talking about an obligation to conduct an investigation. It doesn't tell you how to do it. It basically says you must do it. And that's Article 26. And but you've seen that before. So we can actually go on to the next one, which is Article 37, which provides the list of technical areas that the ICAO shall publish annexes on, and they're listed here. And you can see item K is investigation of accidents. And then, like any good government document, at the very end, it says, and such other matters concerning safety, regulatory, and efficiency of air navigation as may from time to time appear appropriate. So there is a specific list, but then if they want to do something else, then this authority is broadly given at the end of Article 37 here. All right, if we can go on to the next slide. Article 54, I think you've heard mentioned that they are obligated, and you can see the word shall there, adopt standards and call them annexes. So that's where the term comes from. I always thought it was sort of a curious word, but maybe it's got some special meaning in treaty language. But that is the origin of the term annexes, and it says something the council shall do. And then one last one on the next slide, Article 55. And you've seen this before, and it's the authority for ICAO to investigate any situation, including some of the examples that Thor gave us earlier. But it should note that this is permissive functions, and this section starts the council may. Doesn't require that the council do this. So if you just read Article E, you might think that any contracting state can force ICAO to do an investigation, but that's not the case. It must be approved by the council. The council has the authority to decide whether or not they want to conduct that investigation in response to a request from a state. Okay, so those are some of the articles. If we go to the next slide, there's been a lot of discussion about annexes, standards, recommended practices. The bottom line, I think, for those of us in industry that are used to more frequently deal with regulators, think that standards and recommended practices, think regulation. So, you know, Arnaud gave a very good definition earlier of what the standards and recommended practices are. My version of that is the standards are going to get translated into regulations by the regulator, and hopefully the recommended practices will be translated into regulations as well. The difference there being ICAO considers the standards as mandatory, and the recommended practices as well. It'd be really good if you had a regulation like this as well. The other category of information that ICAO publishes are documents, and there's well over 10,000 documents now, and that is guidance material. And the analogy for that would be advisory circulars. So it doesn't create a regulatory obligation, or it doesn't create a standard or recommended practice, but it provides guidance on how states can meet those standards and recommended practices, very much in the same way that an advisory circular provides guidance on how you can meet a regulation. So I think those are the two ways to think about the types of materials that ICAO publishes. Okay, if we go to the next slide, you'll see yet again another list of the annexes, and this is the same list that Arnaud gave his story about, the airman going through the flight. And again, Annex 13 is the one that is probably of most interest to many people in this group. So I won't dwell on, I will, actually, there's a couple here that are worth mentioning as investigators that we sometimes would be well to be familiar with. One is 12, search and rescue, and an interesting situation arose in the investigation of MH370 is when does a search end and an investigation begin? And that was sort of a gray area in MH370 because the search continued well after the formal investigation was begun. So there were some interactions there that actually prompted some looking at some of the language to make sure that that part is clear. Another part is facilitation, and Annex 9, that really has to do with the obligation for states to facilitate an investigation. For example, perhaps helping with visas that are required for accredited reps to travel to the site. Those sorts of items are covered in Annex 9. And then the others, often become perhaps a topic area of during an investigation to see if there's perhaps something in an annex that, is an opportunity for improvement. And in some cases, safety recommendations are addressed to ICAO by accident investigation authorities. Okay, if we can move on to the next slide. So I recognize this is a bit of a busy slide, so I'll give you a moment and I'll sort of walk you through it. And another way of looking at this is it's a bottom-up view of how the impact. So we've got ICAO at the top. ICAO publishes standards to the states, and whichever state you live in, that consider that one there. The state creates legislation. The legislation often creates agencies, whether it's an accident investigation authority, a national aviation authority. Occasionally, the legislation will directly dictate what industry must do, but in the majority of cases, the legislation creates an agency, and then the agency creates regulations. And the regulations apply to the industry, which is across the bottom there, whether it's an air navigation service provider, an airport, airline, manufacturer, maintenance organization, etc. Over on the side, in the dotted lines in the purple, are standard setting organizations. And I listed some of those earlier, RTCA, AIRINC, EuroCAE, and others. And there was a question in the chat earlier about how can the standard setting process at ICAO be sped up. And one way that there's a bit of a trend is for, and we see this in regulations as well, rather than having the regulations list, the technical requirements of a specific system, they instead are more and more referring to a published standard, perhaps by one of these organizations here. And ICAO is starting to do the same thing and consider moving a little bit more in that direction, where the specific technical requirements might not be embodied within the annex itself, but instead refer to standards published by another outside organization. All right. Okay, so if we take the same diagram and move to the next slide, I've taken the connecting lines off, and what I've tried to put on here is just looking at all the various annexes and how they affect the different players or the different stakeholders in the aviation ecosystem. Annex 19 is sort of the gray oval. That's safety management system. So that involves the states are required to have a safety management system, and when they create one, that usually involves the creation of safety management systems within industry so Annex 19 sort of encompasses the entire thing. In yellow, you'll see Annex 13. Obviously, it affects the Accident Investigation Authority of a state, but it also affects the the investigative authority, as well as the regulator, the aviation authority. And it very clearly affects all of the folks at the bottom, air navigation service providers, et cetera, who may become involved in an investigation. So this chart here is intended to give you an idea about how those different annexes reach out across the ecosystem and across industry whenever a change is made. All right, if we move on to the next slide. This is another view of how what the process for change is. So this is, I think, the third diagram to try and represent the same thing. The first one was by Padhraic, and he gave the what I call the wheel or the sunflower version with the ANC at the center and going clockwise around the various steps. Arnaud gave a much more detailed version. And then this is a little bit in the middle. And this one, we've tried to separate out the various roles. So it states and invited organizations at the top, the Assembly, ICAO Council, the Air Navigation Commission, Air Navigation Bureau, and then the technical panels. And then this is not the only path by which changes are made, but it is sort of represent a typical or common path. So, working papers at an assembly or states submit working papers to an assembly, which discusses them, usually quite briefly, and then issues a resolution. Eventually, that goes through the council, down to the Air Navigation Commission, which creates a job card, which is specific action that they would like one of the technical panels to address. The technical panels will create working papers and potentially come up with draft standards, which are reviewed on the way back up. And the council, if they approve them, will write a state letter saying these are the proposed changes. States have an opportunity to comment. And then after all those are considered and taken into account, we have a revised annex, and then potentially the states might publish a difference to that. So that's the process for revising an annex or a standard or recommended practice. In contrast, for guidance material, usually starts at the technical panel. Sometimes it starts in the secretariat, but the technical panels working groups can create the draft guidance material, and then it's published by the Air Navigation Bureau, or more broadly, the Secretariat, as a revised document. So you can see the path for updating guidance material documents is much shorter and can be more responsive than the path for updating the annexes themselves. All right, I think that is the end of my portion of the presentation. So Kate, if there's time for questions, perhaps we could do that now.
Thank you very much, Simon. It's very interesting to get the perspective of industry. I think we've time for just one question, which is, you, like myself, worked in an equipment manufacturer. I started my career in working for a large equipment manufacturer. And when you're working day to day in that sort of a role, ICAO can feel like quite a remote entity. What advice would you give to people working in industry for how they can get more involved with the work that ICAO does and maybe influence the way that SARPs are developed?
So it's the last slide that I showed is actually a sort of a good roadmap. I don't know if it's possible to put that slide back up for a moment. Yeah. I think it's slide number 50, if that helps, of the presentation. But the horizontal lines in that chart were intended to represent the various roles, and for folks that are not within government, and I'll answer your question, Kate, from the context of industry, since you mentioned that. So, for example, if you're an equipment manufacturer based in France, let's say, you've got a couple of opportunities. One is you can contact your state. Your state has a representative to ICAO, and if the concern you have about the issue that needs updating is shared with them, they may agree and choose to take it forward via that route. Alternately, if you're a manufacturer, then you have there's an invited organization called ICCAIA, which is an umbrella international organization, and it has under it various national organizations, including one in Europe that can that concerns itself with what's going on at ICAO, and also helps nominate members to technical panels to serve on the various technical panels, and similarly for other parts of the industry as well. So really, the two ways to get involved is through your state or through one of the invited organizations, if you would like to get involved in the workings of ICAO and participate and contribute to the technical panels.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Simon. So I think we will move on to the final presentation of the afternoon, which is by Olivier Ferrante, who's going to talk to us about Annex 13 and the AIG panel. As many of you will know, Olivier is the chair of the AIG panel. He's also a senior strategy advisor at the BEA, and he is the chair of our ESASI committee. So I'll hand over to Olivier now.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kate, for your introduction. So if we can move on to the next slide, I'll give you an overview of some Annex 13 key features. And I'll start with its international dimension that Thor mentioned a little bit earlier, but I think that Annex 13 can be seen are the truly international annexes that includes rules governing interactions between its ICAO member states, and it's especially the case in a situation of a crisis. So many provisions in Annex 13 are indeed of diplomatic nature, especially when we refer to the ACREPs, so to the accredited representatives. So these provisions are really based on practical aspects, and I would say on common sense, because investigators need to get access to pertinent information from different places, which are largely in the states where the airplane is manufactured, registered, built, and designed. And likewise, the stakeholders like the regulator, the operator, the manufacturer, etc., they need access to the data collected by the investigators in case they have to take urgent remedial action to fix the safety issue. So this really, there is an international two-way flow of safety data, which is one characteristic of the Annex 13. And around that, you have privileges on duties for ACREPs and technical advisors. So this is really a diplomatic tool where the ICAO states, they talk to each other via their accident investigation authorities, which are state-based, and the technical advisors from the manufacturer, the operator, and the regulator, they work under the control of these independent authorities. So this overall, so then you have a consultation process for the final report that was mentioned earlier, and that really enables all parties to have access to data and to provide comments. So overall, that process, I think, is very transparent within this international team. But it's important to keep in mind that the control of the communication remains the privilege of the state conducting the investigation, and generally it's a state of occurrence. So at national level, accident investigation, especially when dealing with a major accident with an air disaster, it's not only a technical activity, but it also has to take into account the social-political aspects and the crisis that surrounds a disaster. So at national level, you have numerous institutions that are involved and interact with accident investigation in response to a major accident, and it's specifically the case for the judicial authorities. So in any state, a major accident represents a national and of course an international crisis that goes beyond the very simple domain of Annex 13. So this is a characteristic of Annex 13, that it goes really beyond civil aviation, and it's often a tool that is associated with a political crisis, sometimes with ripple effect beyond aspects governed by the Chicago Convention. And in any state, what's good is that the IAC doesn't work alone, and he's supported by a large team of accident investigators. So that's one of the characteristics for the national and international dimension of Annex 13. And of course, Annex 13 provides a lot of validated data through the final reports. We heard about the e-library of final reports. There is a safety recommendation of global concern. There's also a database of safety recommendation, and of course, the ADREP data from after each accident and serious incident. So all those databases, they provide validated feedback and validated safety information for all the safety management initiatives. So these are some broad characteristics of Annex 13. So if we move to the next slide, I'll jump into the panel. So it's a group of technical experts formed by the Air Navigation Commission. The way we work is governed by the document you have on the right, Doc 7984. So the group is formed of 27. So at the last meeting, we had 27 states represented and 7 international organizations. We were 40 in presence and 20 work remotely, but hopefully the next meeting will be 100% in presence, and it will take place in Montreal next May. So we'll work to advance solutions to problems and to develop SARCs, so the standards and recommended practices. Our work program is approved by the ANC, and the secretary is provided by ICAO, but I'll get to that in more detail in the next slide. So if you go to the next slide, I tried with this very simplified version that you have on screen to show you that on the left part, in blue, you have the states. Where you have the Air Navigation Commission, and you saw his president early on this afternoon. We work under the authority of the ANC, so this is where we are located, and our role is really to work on SARPs. We're supported by the Air Navigation Commission, and especially by the AIG section and by Thor for what we do, and the Air Navigation, so the AIG section is within the Air Navigation Bureau, which is part of the ICAO Secretariat. So you can see that on this very simplified representation, on the one hand, on the left, you have the states dealing with SARPs, and on the right, you have the ICAO Secretariat, who is mainly dealing with supporting what the Council is doing, but also by providing and having the responsibility of developing a guidance material and manual. So if we move on to the next slide, you already saw that slide, and I think it's important to have the perspective of amending SARPs from different points of view, and I'll try to be practical on this one because we work under we work for the Air Navigation Commission, and our work program is done through job cards. You have the job cards on the left at the level of the Air Navigation Commission. So the panel is under there. And for our meetings, we prepare our meetings with working papers. Our meetings typically the last 4 days. So we develop a draft SARPs, so standards and recommended practices. And now, of course, we also work on the associated guidance material, but this is on the side because it's also done in conjunction with the ICAO Secretariat, as you understood before. So when we propose our draft SARPs, they are reviewed by the ANC, who is then putting them together and provides a state letter with proposals. So later on, you'll see an example of the latest state letter that is right now under consideration for comments. So the comments are provided by the states and invited organization. Then the ANC review the comments, and then there is a state letter for adoption. So in this process, you have 2 important state letters: one for the proposed amendments, and then for adoption, to go to the revised annex. And as it was said before, there is a way to notify differences. And the next slide is about the notification of differences that you also heard before. Yes, I forgot to mention that the process is about 2 years. And the notification of differences, so Arnaud mentioned Article 38, it enables states to notify ICAO of differences to standards. And then it's ICAO notifies all the states by publishing these differences. It used to be done via supplements to the annexes, but now it's done online, and I'll give you an example just afterwards. But what's interesting to note is that when you have a difference, when you notify a difference, and that difference is related to a protocol question in the audit program, it means that you'll have a finding. So that's also important to note that if you notify a difference, you may end up with a finding in the audit program. And so the next slide gives you now an example of the ICAO EFOD database. So this is where states now are invited to notify their compliance or differences in this electronic filing of differences. And as you can see, if you really look close to that example, in the middle you have the number 177. So this is the example for Annex 13. So in Annex 13, basically there are 177 lines where you have to, for each of them, to notify a difference or not. And when you have an amendment, you have new lines coming in. And this is a way for states and ICAO to know who is compliant or who has notified or not any difference with the SARPs. So if we go to the next slide, that's the example that is ongoing. So at our latest meeting, the panel number 6, so that was not the last meeting, but it was the one before, our report went through the ANC, and the ANC then through the ICAO Secretariat published the state letter of proposed amendments to Annex 13. So this is a letter dated at 14 October 2022, and states have to reply before the 14th of April this year, so 2023. In this state letter, you have proposed amendments on the following items. So I'll list them quickly. So the investigation involving unmanned aircraft, the release of investigative information, so global aeronautical distress and safety system data and information. This is in a way related to safety data being stored in the cloud, for example. Consultation period of final reports and the international dissemination of final reports. International dissemination of final report, this is to support the e-library of final report that was shown before, because this is really an important tool to centralize the final reports published by states. And if I may just elaborate a little bit on the item number 4, consultation period of final reports. We had a debate within a long discussion within the panel between 60 days or 30 days to keep it simple. And we find at the end a good consensus that you'll see in this state letter. I mentioned that example because under my chairmanship, we've always worked through consensus to make really strong proposals for the ANC. So the report that we sent to the proposals that we propose to the Air Navigation Commission are based on a strong consensus. So the next slide is about what we are doing currently, and in a way, it will represent more or less the agenda, part of the agenda of our next meeting that will be held in May this year in Montreal. So we have discussions on the accidents involving acts of unlawful interference, investigations in conflict of interest scenarios and the context of aircraft downing. That was covered by Thor at the beginning of this session, and this is really a big task for the subgroups of the panel and for the panel at length. We also have a working group dealing with regional cooperation in accident and incident investigation. So it's about RIO, and we are trying to promote investigation cooperation mechanism in a pragmatic way to invite states to cooperate and to provide each other some kind of mutual support to face accidents, and especially at a large scale. There is a discussion on transparency and protection of sensitive information. And yes, we have a working group dealing with the protection of information from other devices like GoPros. We had a question before during that session, and we're trying to harmonize the way states are dealing with this source of safety data. So we also discussed the timely release of final reports and the follow-up of the symposium on family assistance that was held in December 2021 in Las Palmas. So we have a working group dealing with information to air accident victims and their relatives. So these are the current topics that are currently discussed within the panel. And I think we'll get to the last slide of my presentation. So in conclusion, if you can go to the next slide, I would like to highlight that the strengths of Annex 13 is that it's really well known by all ICAO member states. That's a tool, but it's also well known because it's a relatively short and concise document. So that's really helpful to get familiar with its provisions. And we tried during our discussion to keep this annex quite short and concise, but still flexible enough to cope with all type of situation. But of course, we have amendments. We amend it to evolve and to address a fast-changing environment. And as you can see in the proposed amendments, we have new provisions on drones. So this is really to cope with our fast-changing system. And with that, I hope I gave you a good short overview of Annex 13 and how it's amended in practice And I'm ready for question. Kate, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olivier. I'm just scrolling down the questions now. So just to go back really to the question we had right at the very start of the session that I said I'd come back to later. And the question was, given the length of time that it takes to amend annexes, do you think there are ways that the timescales could be shortened in order to accommodate rapidly changing technologies such as drones or changes to operations?
So if we go back to the provisions on drone, for example, that's a good question, because on our side, at the level of the panel, our provisions on drones were ready since were ready for a couple of years before they were entered into that state letter. But ICAO we have to make sure that we don't work in silo, and that the other annexes, especially when there are some cross references, that everything is done in a harmonized way. And this is where the ICAO Secretariat has a key role, because they make sure that the broad, and of course the Secretariat and the Air Navigation Commission, but the Secretariat being really permanent, with permanent staff, they are in this position to keep track of the definitions in each annexes and to make sure that everything is consistent. So there was a lot of work being done in Annex 6 and Annex 8, and Annex 13 was referring to these provisions there. So this is why now those provisions are aligned there. So we can do, I mean, I think 2 years, if you look at what we do after discussion in the panel and then the state lab, 2 years, I think it's quite efficient, because you want to make sure that when you draft a proposal, it's understood the same way around the world. So this is, you have to keep that in mind, and sometimes you assume something. But this is why I forgot to mention that in our panel we have representatives from all continents. So and that's very important, that our provisions are understood the same way around the world. And also I noticed that if you go too fast, you can sometimes have problems in the interpretation of the provisions. And we also noticed that another way to check your provision is through translation. So I'm French, so when I look at the translation of the annex, because everything is discussed in English, but then when you look at how it's translated in your own language, then sometimes you see some minor differences, and you have to take this into account. So I think it's very important also to take the time to make sure that you draft very solid and robust standards and recommended practice, but especially the standards, because then you have to think of the ripple effects. It means that when you come up with a standard, it means that all states around the world have to amend either their law, their secondary laws, or their procedures. So it means a lot of work downstream. So you have to factor everything.
Thanks, Olivier. Thank you. And that brings us to the end of the presentations. If we could just go back to the very final slide of the presentation there, and I'll just make one or two closing remarks. So just on there's one more slide after that. So yeah, I'd just like to thank all the presenters today. An awful lot of work went into preparing all the presentation material, and we really appreciate the time of these 5 very busy people that we got together. So thank you very much to all the presenters and everyone who helped behind the scenes. As you'll see on the slide there, our annual seminar, ESASI 2023, is due to take place in Bratislava in Slovakia on the 26th and 27th of April. It'd be great to see as many of you as possible there. It's always a good 2 days of knowledge sharing and looking at new methodologies and meeting our colleagues from lots of different countries. You can register on our website there. You can see the link is there. So lastly, thank you very much to all the participants today for joining us. We hope you found it useful, and we hope to see you again at our next event. Thank you.